Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Nick Owens, and I'm going to be chairing this webinar on the blue economy. Welcome to you all. We have a very good number of people attending, and I'm sure we're in for a good treat here. You have heard, I hope, the message that the meeting is being recorded. However, none of the participants have their cameras enabled, so nobody will be able to see participants. The panelists can be seen, but even if you don't like the notion that you can't be seen, if you would prefer not to take part in a meeting that's being recorded now, I would suggest that now's the time for you to leave. We have a range of speakers there, which I'll mention something about each one of them in a minute. And what we're going to do with the question and answers is, if you could use the chat box there, then what we will do is we will take questions at the end. So what we don't want to do is to disturb the flow of the meeting. So we'll take the questions at the end. Our host, Jill McNichol, will be collating those and keeping an eye on those as they come in. So we have a glittering array of speakers. We have a fine constellation of stars here. First of all, we have Ben Wilson from SAMS there. Ben is a researcher working on the links between marine life and industrial activities in coastal waters, and in particular on the interactions of the renewable energy sector and marine mammals. Then we have Amanda Ryan, who is chair of the Crown Estate Scotland. She's a chartered forester and has extensive experience in rural and community development and stakeholder engagement. And Amanda is also a member of the Highlands and Islands, a board member of the Highlands and Islands Enterprise. So that's an important role that she plays there. Then we have Michael Tate, who's managing director of the Shetland Mussels Limited. Michael has extensive experience in a wide range of aquaculture activities, particularly salmon farming. He was the board member, or is a board member still, on the Scottish Shellfish Marketing Group, and is also a board member on the Scottish Aquaculture Innovation Centre, representing the SMEs, and that's a very active organisation and very important within the Scottish aquaculture scene. Then we have Audrey McIver, who is Director of Energy and Low Carbon at Highlands and Islands Enterprise. Audrey has been active in economic and community development of the Highlands and Islands for a long part of her career. And she is very confident that the transition to net zero carbon for Scotland will offer exciting prospects, and she believes Scotland is well placed to punch well above its weight in that activity. Then we have Rachel Shucksmith, who is the Marine Spatial Planning Manager at North Atlantic Fisheries Centre in Shetland. Rachel has extensive experience in policy development, marine licensing, and data assessment and mapping and so on. And Rachel manages the development of the Shetland Islands Marine Spatial Plan, which is highly regarded and is thought of as being one of the most advanced marine spatial plans in Europe. And then last but not least, we'll finish off with Ewan Scott, who is on this particular occasion representing Barrow and Battersea Community Limited. He is a bit of a polymath, has been involved in many activities around conservation biology, but also renewable energy and infrastructure projects. He has been part of the community company since 2007, and currently a big project that he's involved managing is in a pilot seaweed farm and the technology economic options surrounding that. So I think you'll agree we've got a fine range of speakers. So what I want to do really is I just give a couple of minutes introduction, and I'd like to start by reading you the World Bank definition. This was written in 2017. The World Bank definition of the blue economy. And it's got 4 elements, which I'll pick up on in a minute. So there's the sustainable use of ocean resources for economic growth, improved livelihoods and jobs, while preserving the health of the ocean ecosystem. Now, what I want to do is just pick up just 1 or 2 salient points from each of those 4 elements. So the use of resources, the economic growth, livelihood and jobs, and preserving the health of the ocean ecosystem. Now, most people I would venture to suggest is when you start thinking about the blue economy, start thinking immediately about what ocean resources there are that can be exploited sustainably or not. Now, I personally believe that that's a mistake. I think we should, when we're thinking of the blue economy, actually start with the last of those 4 elements, and that is think about the preservation of the health of the ocean ecosystem, because that is the natural capital that everything else will depend upon. And unless we've got that right, then there won't be a blue economy. And so I think that's where we start. I think the ocean systems at the moment are really very badly out of balance. So the natural capital upon which all the blue economy sits is out of balance. And one of the things that we all have to do collectively is to try and bring that back in balance. And I think this is where UHI, working with Highlands and Islands Enterprise, can actually make a difference. We think of the natural resources then for a second. We're blessed with an enormous set of resources, and we'll hear a lot about that. Something like 61% of the coastline of Scotland actually resides in our region, in the Highlands and Islands region. And we also are very blessed with a very, very strong technical infrastructure already within our region. And so we do have, with the combination of the natural and built resources, we have got a very good starting point. We think about the economy and the growth of that economy. It's already very high. So in the blue economy, in Europe, roughly speaking, about 25,000 pounds, UK pounds, per head of population per annum is linked with the blue economy. Whereas in Scotland, we're already up at about £100,000 per head per annum in the blue economy. And that, of course, is easily set to rise. Fisheries, roughly speaking, about £50,000 per head for the wider UK, whereas in Scotland, that is between 75 and £100,000 per head. So already, you know, we're as a country and as a people, we're well ahead there. And tourism is worth about £500 million to the Scottish economy. In terms of growth, sort of a very conservative growth estimates are that aquaculture is likely to experience at least a 7 to 10% growth, but maybe that's a bit conservative possibly, between now and 2030, and the renewables considerably more than that, perhaps 17 to 20% growth. If we then think about the jobs and livelihoods section in this definition, already something like about 8% of all of the jobs within the Highlands and Islands region can be linked to the blue economy, a very significant amount. And the projections are that that percentage is likely to increase to at least 12% by the year 2030. And just to think in terms of numbers, aquaculture alone supports about 2,000 jobs as of now. And then finally, I think the really big prize for the blue economy for our region actually is in marine biotechnology. There is already a at the start of a marine biotechnology industry, but it's set to grow if we work together on this. I think it could become an enormous multi-stranded industry, perhaps dwarfing all of these other activities that I've already mentioned. At the moment, oil and gas is still the biggest sector for us, but that's, as we know, that is going to decline. And I personally believe that we could be seeing the marine biotechnology sector actually replacing the oil and gas industry. And I think we need UHI and Highlands and Islands Enterprise actually to be working together to make this happen. The university will be there doing cutting edge research, fundamental biology, fundamental chemistry, novel chemical processing, and molecular biology and so on. But that has to sit within a well-resourced set of facilities, and that is where the Highlands and Islands Enterprise can fit in. So I think collectively we need to work together there, and I think we could create something really outstanding. So I think that's all I want to say at this point, and I'll hand over to Ben in a moment. And so Ben, if you want to go ahead.
Thanks, Nick. Thanks for the introduction. I think I've just scratched off several things I was going to say about the blue economy. That's absolutely fine. And I'll just move on to the first slide. And I wanted to just introduce a little bit about the work that's going on in UHI that relates to the blue economy. And I guess the first thing, I guess we're going to hear more about aspects of the blue economy as it relates to Scotland and particularly the Highlands and Islands. And I mean, it's hugely important in terms of the majority of the UK aquaculture sector is relevant to the Highlands and Islands or based in the region. A vast amount of Europe's wind and wave resources is available, will be available around the Highlands and Islands. And there are the big diversity of different sizes and types of communities and activities that go on. And I guess it's really important to say that the UHI is an unusual university. We're not in some ivory tower campus somewhere isolated. UHI is very much spread across the region and is part of many communities relevant to blue economy activities and the sectors. And I guess a picture of my wellies there, to the point is we're a university with our wellies on. We're aware of the local opportunities, we're aware of the local challenges, and very much involved in on-the-ground type issues. One thing to say about the spread, if you go from the furthermost campus in Argyll up to the northernmost campus up in Shetland, that covers a range for those from the central belt or from England. That range goes from about Glasgow to about Kent. So the footprint of the UHI is geographically enormous and very relevant to the activities we're about to hear about. So it's a university with its wellies on. Okay, I'm just going to very briefly talk about three areas of activity across the university. Can't talk about all of them, obviously, but I'm just going to give you three highlights. First one about aquaculture and the role of social science. Second one, two examples of marine tourism, focusing on the local, i.e. Scottish, and then translation out to wider interest globally. And the third one is about the educational aspects of one educational aspect going on in the university just now on renewables. In terms of aquaculture, there are a variety of sectors from finfish aquaculture through to shellfish and seaweed, which we're going to hear more about. These sectors have very broad economic opportunities and activities that they provide. They also meet through to national goals and aspirations, and also international significant global challenges in terms of feeding world populations, dealing with climate change, dealing with depopulation, biodiversity loss, and so on. And so there's a on the ground growth of these sectors, but also national drivers for their development and growth. And I will be hearing more about that. But at UHI, there's a considerable stream of work growing on how do on the social science side of these interactions, in the sense that how do these broader sectors translate down to local on the ground initiatives and communities and so on, and how do they interact, and how can they be done in such a way that communities can be sustainable, the activities are relevant to local people, but also deliver on these broader national and international objectives. And so through a series of projects, international projects at European level to national projects, and down to ones relevant to local councils and so on, there have been a number of projects looking at how do local people see different developments being brought forward, and then to understand where the areas of conflict are so that they can be brought through and developed in the most sustainable ways. So there's a series of social science projects ongoing to do these activities. Moving on to tourism, I'm just going to talk about two projects. The first one's an ongoing project at the moment called The Coast That Shaped the World. It's joint funded by NatureScot, which was SNH before, and match funded by CalMac. And the idea is to try and broaden out our perspectives of the sea in a Scottish context, and that's being done through a partnership between UHI and 20 destination management organizations to capture stories about the sea, and they've managed to capture 400 narratives, marine stories and understandings to develop, to take those stories and then develop them into innovative digital and physical exhibitions and apps and so on, so that to understand more about how people see the sea, to broaden out tourism, to bring people to sort of diversify the normal stories that are told about Scotland, and expose people to areas of Scotland they might not normally experience. And this is an ongoing project that's going on to December 2022, which will link into the Year of Scottish Stories. And the second aspect of tourism is some work going on led by researchers Donna Hendel and others at UHI, but relevant to the South Pacific, specifically looking at focusing on Vanuatu at the moment. But it's looking at to try and improve the value of tourism, to increase the quality of tourist presentations and activities to tourists coming into these countries by upskilling the local communities. And we're using UHI. UHI is very good at online learning, so using those skills there to provide online content to teach local tour guides to improve the product of what they're providing, done so in a way that's sensitive to government and tribal government ways of doing things, and delivered in a relevant language, Islama. And this is a project that's aimed to really improve the quality of the presentations, provide a career progress route, job opportunities, to provide for small, medium enterprises delivering future tourism training, and to produce internationally recognized qualifications, to improve the rate of pay for those developing it and benefiting families and communities. And the third area I was going to talk about is in relation to renewables and education the university is providing. As I said at the beginning, we're a university with our welly boots on. we have a large number of researchers across the piece with expertise in the resources relevant to marine renewables, the environment, and various tools like robotics and so on. And we also supervise PhD students. So to marry these two areas of expertise together, we run several programs. One of them, I'm sorry about all the logos on this, my animation doesn't work in WebEx, unfortunately, but we have a doctoral training program running at the moment. It's an Interreg project joining together skills from the west of Scotland to Northern Ireland and the Republic, and run through Queen's University, Ulster University, Letterkenny Institute of Technology and UHI, and have brought together a series of companies to generate industry relevant projects for PhD students. And so we've got, at UHI level, we've got 10 students currently studying PhDs relevant to marine renewables in this sector. And I've only got a few minutes, so I won't talk about all of these, but if you want more details about those students and what they're doing, go to thebrydencentre.com. They're listed there. And we're currently looking to spin up a second one of these Bryden Centre type PhD programs. So if people are interested, then contact me. And that's me. Here's some names to thank for putting these slides together, and I'll pass back to Nick.
That's great. Thank you very much, Ben. Super. So we'll go straight on to Amanda Bryan now. Amanda, it's all yours.
Ben, as it says there, my name's Amanda Bryan, and I have the great pleasure to chair the board of Crown Estate Scotland. And for those of you that aren't familiar, Crown Estate Scotland is a relatively new public corporation, and we manage the Scottish Crown Estate assets on behalf of Scottish ministers. And the map there demonstrates the range of assets that we're responsible for. It includes some marine assets and some non-marine assets. There are 4 large rural estates, the rights to river salmon fishing and gold and silver, naturally occurring gold and silver across much of Scotland. About 50% of the foreshore, and that includes 5,800 moorings and some ports and harbours. We're also responsible for virtually all of the seabed out to 12 nautical miles. And at the moment there's something like 750 fish farming sites and a wide range of cables and pipelines. We also have the rights out to 200 nautical miles over leasing for offshore renewable energy and gas and carbon storage. So we don't actually do oil and gas, that's been retained by Westminster, but everything else out to 200 nautical miles. And then we have a small element of urban property, some retail and office space in George Street in Edinburgh. So you can see it's a very, very broad portfolio, but it is very much dominated by our marine and coastal assets. And in terms of what we do with that, we took over managing these assets from the Crown Estate. And for those of you that were familiar with the Crown Estate, the focus that the Crown Estate had was very much on deriving revenue from the assets and increasing the capital value of those assets. We have a much broader remit, and while growing revenue and returning that to the Scottish Consolidated Fund for onward dispersal through the local authorities and onto communities, well, that's still important. We also look to manage the assets very proactively in order to deliver local economic benefits, social benefits and environmental benefits as well. So we're looking at how do we derive wider value from these assets. It's not just about the income and the capital value. And we do that very much through working in partnership. You'll hear later from you know, from the likes of Ewan and Michael, who will both be tenants of the Scottish Crown Estate, and really much of what goes on these assets isn't delivered by us, but it's delivered by tenants and by other partners, communities, local authorities, and others. So we take a very sort of proactive and enabling approach to our management, and it is very much about how we can work with others and enable our partners and our tenants to derive further value from these assets. Just some headline figures for you. Over the last 3 years, we have delivered something in the region of £32.4 million into the Scottish Consolidated Fund. So that's roughly in the region of sort of 11 million pounds a year that we're in terms of net revenue that we're returning, and that is due to increase substantially as we see more income coming in from offshore wind in particular. But we are also sort of churn elements of that asset, and there's also elements of capital income that we generate. So in the current corporate plan, we will be investing £70 million in a range of initiatives, again to try and work with partners to deliver more value from these assets, and a lot of that investment will be in the sort of coastal areas, particularly around ports and harbours. So in terms of what we are doing to build, or our role in relation to building the blue economy, there's an indication there. Our first objective in our corporate plan is very much focused on the blue economy, because we recognise the importance of the assets that we manage there. And you'll see that there's a very broad range of activities. Many of the speakers that will follow on from me will focus in on just one of these areas, but as an organisation, we're active across them all in one way or another. And I'm just going to take you on a whistle-stop tour of these different areas. So first of all, in terms of offshore renewables, obviously that covers a wide range, but focusing on offshore wind, because that's very much our priority at the moment. We have a live round, seabed leasing round for offshore wind, which is called ScotWind. It's due to close in mid-July, and we'll be looking to identify the successful bidders, I think towards the end of this year, start of next year. So we'll get a sense of who will be taking forward those developments. So we're taking a very much a plan-based approach. So we're working in partnership with Marine Scotland, who have developed a marine spatial plan for offshore wind. And the intention is that by taking a plan-based approach, it will actually help to speed up the consenting process, because the plan has already been consulted on and the areas identified. So there is the potential to deliver an additional 11 gigawatts of capacity through this first phase of ScotWind. This current round is just the first of what we envisage will be a series of leasing rounds, and we're already moving to look at what we're calling INTOG, which is essentially the North Sea transition for oil and gas. So how we can utilise the infrastructure, the oil and gas infrastructure, and work with the oil and gas companies to transition and maximise the use of those assets for renewable. Really important to emphasise that our approach to offshore wind leasing is designed to help deliver not just the increase in renewable energy, but it's also about supporting that just transition and encouraging job creation at different stage of these projects. And a big emphasis we've put in Scotland is on development of supply chain, and we're requiring all developers to give a supply chain development statement as part of their bid process. Linked very closely to offshore renewables is ports and harbours, and ports and harbours are absolutely a key part of helping to deliver or maximising and enabling the full potential of offshore wind in Scotland. And what we're looking at the moment is how we can work with those responsible for managing ports and harbours to invest to make sure that we have the right facilities in order to deliver a successful rollout of offshore wind. So we recently commissioned a piece of work looking at what's going to be required in terms of investment in ports and harbours, and we're now liaising with a number of people about how we can work with them to make that investment and make sure that the infrastructure is fit for purpose when it's needed. And we can see, the benefits to some of our perhaps more fragile rural communities through what's already happened. So, for example, if you look at Wick Harbour and some of the developments there in terms of O&M support for the Beatrice wind farm, I mean, it's been absolutely transformational what's happened around Wick Harbour, and it's great to see that. And that's actually something that's very close to my heart because I grew up in Wick. So to see a harbour that had gone through this sort of decline in fishing industry, but to see it coming back to life through offshore wind is absolutely fantastic. Another area that we've been looking at is energy systems. Again, we recently undertook a study looking at what energy systems might be able to deliver, drawing very much on the experience of the Surf and Turf project, which is located in Orkney. And for those of you that aren't familiar with that, that project produces hydrogen using a fairly curtailed onshore wind and tidal power from the island of Ede. And then the hydrogen is transported to Kirkwall Harbour, where it's used to generate electricity and heat for the ferry's berth there and for the harbour building. So where you don't have grid connection, it's how can we make sure that we utilise the resources in a way that makes sense locally. So we're starting to see other activities of that kind of nature coming forward. So for example, we've been working with Nova and they're developing a proposal working with the communities on Islay, really looking at how the tidal resource there can produce clean green power and linking in with the whisky industry there. So these are just a couple of examples, but I think there's really significant potential for these kind of initiatives in our more far-flung communities, and for smaller, perhaps closer to shore projects. So it's not just all about the big wind farms, but it's about other marine energy systems closer to shore. So we're working really at the cutting edge of that side of things. Another area where we're heavily involved, I've already indicated the scale of the aquaculture sector. Emphasis at the moment very much on finfish, which we're looking to sustain and grow over time, working with the sector and looking at new technologies and ways of deploying those technologies. Shellfish sector, significantly smaller, but really, really important in particular areas. When you look at Shetland and the mussel production in Shetland, absolutely key to that local economy. So it's how, again, can we sustain and help grow those those sectors. But I think that the real potential for the future is very much seaweed cultivation, seaweed farming, and it's great to see the work that SAMS has been doing, and some of the developments at the European Marine Science Park there at Dunstaffnage, which has been developed by HIE. So again, it's how do we work with the likes of UHI and HI and make sure that we are making the assets that we're responsible for managing available in such a way that it helps to promote and grow particularly these new sectors going forward. Almost through, but not to forget marine tourism. I think we probably have between the number of moorings are absolutely phenomenal, and then of course you've got pontoons and marinas, and again it's certainly pre-COVID it's seen as being one of the the major sort of growth areas, and hopefully over time that will be able to pick up again, and we again very much recognise the potential of the sector and its importance for again for our coastal communities. We're just about to launch a boat-based tourism challenge fund, where we will be looking to co-invest with communities and others in some of the infrastructure required to support boat-based tourism, and we've had a sustainable communities fund running, which again has seen a number of projects being developed in that area. We also manage a number of assets of Scottish Crown Estate assets which link into this, and one example of that would be the harbour at Port Gordon, and we've actually just entered into a memorandum of agreement with the community, a newly formed community trust in Port Gordon, with the intention that they will actually take on ownership of Port Gordon Harbour, because they have a real vision for how they can use the harbour to drive development and regeneration of that community, really. So it's great that we've been able to work with them on that. So,
okay, Amanda, yeah. Can I encourage you to start winding up, please?
This is my last slide.
Okay.
So just to finish off, it's just to say that it is really important that we take a partnership approach, and that we work with others, and Scottish Government are in the process of developing a Blue Economy Action Plan, and that's very much going to be focusing on where by working together we can actually add value and deliver the most from our, I guess, marine and coastal natural assets. So we're working alongside Scottish Government on that approach to really look at how we can take a targeted approach to funding and investment to derive value for Scotland as a whole. So that's where I was going to leave it, and I'll happily take questions later. So thanks very much, Nick.
Thank you, Amanda. That's great, super. Thank you. So I think we'll move straight on to Michael. If you're ready, Michael, and we'll hear about these shellfish that we just heard about from Amanda.
Thanks, Nick. If you could just confirm before I launch, can you hear me okay, Nick?
I can hear you fine. Yep.
Okay, that's always good to know. Right. Just make sure I can work these slides. Right, well, thanks for the introduction earlier on, Nick, and thanks for the chance to come and talk a wee bit about shellfish aquaculture. I'm going to talk today on how shellfish aquaculture plans to grow as part of the blue economy. I want to summarise the benefits of this form of aquaculture, and then mention some of the challenges we face in growing our industry. And then, as an example of an academic industry collaboration, I will tell you about a new project I've been helping to develop called Shellvolution, which will see the UHI take a lead role alongside industry and other stakeholders to deliver a 10-year programme of R&D to help us build our knowledge-based economy and secure the next tranche of growth for our sector. I've been involved in helping to grow the blue economy for most of my career. I just didn't realise that this specifically was what I was doing. But when you consider aquaculture and shellfish aquaculture specifically within the overall blue economy, it seems that we have some very worthwhile benefits to offer. As we face climate change and the post-COVID recovery challenge, we all need to understand how we'll play our part in investing in the right types of development that not only grow the economy, but will offer more to society in terms of environmental and social impacts. I want to highlight how mussel farming as a form of shellfish aquaculture has a powerful role to play in this future. The shellfish farming sector has been established for over 3 decades in Scotland and currently grows around 7,500 tonnes of mussels a year, and in addition to that, 4.5 million oysters. This brings in over £30 million every year through the sales of our products to our customers. The sector has built a reputation for high quality and environmentally friendly food production, which is well received by the consumer and is endorsed by the Marine Stewardship Council. The sector's products are stocked in nearly all UK retailers, as well as most seafood wholesalers and many food service outlets. We currently employ 193 full-time equivalent employees and also directly support over 150 processing jobs in the central belt of Scotland. And we have a key primary role in the aquaculture supply chain as well. This slide shows you where the mussel and oyster farms are and gives an indication of where these jobs are located, basically in many of the rural areas where alternative employment is hard to find. So next, let me tell you a little bit about our unique benefits. Shellfish farming is an extractive form of aquaculture, with shellfish filter feeding on plankton that are naturally occurring in the sea. A byproduct of growing this biomass in the ocean is that the shellfish help regulate and purify the water by removing nutrients. Shellfish are a low carbon food, helped in part by the fact shellfish capture carbon dioxide in the shells and tissues, whilst the farms provide multiple ecological services, including biodiversity, with the formation of natural reef habitats that can serve as shelter and breeding grounds for juvenile fish. This is all achieved whilst growing a healthy and nutritious food that has many health benefits that are hard to get elsewhere, such as essential fatty acids and vitamin B12. Mussel farming takes place in the sea lochs and bows around Scotland's coast and requires farms to provide rope for the mussels to settle and grow upon. Farmers regularly assess their stocks and undertake various husbandry tasks such as grading, thinning, reseeding, and the management of predators and fouling. And mussels are typically harvested after 2 to 3 years of growth and are mostly sold within the UK, with the added benefit there of low food miles. So shellfish farming has quite a positive story to tell. And through the development of the Scottish Aquaculture Vision 2030, which forms part of the Scotland Food and Drink Strategy, the mussel farming sector considers that on existing sites alone, with the average current Shetland performance per site, that the sector has the potential to grow around 18,000 tonnes by 2037, quite a long horizon, which would see the annual turnover increase from the current 30 million to 90 million. It's worth noting that after a decade in the 2000s where mussels specifically enjoyed 9% per annum growth, moving into the 2010s and the 2020, up to 2020, we have seen volumes become more stable. And I've had many farmers reporting that they're reporting increasing levels of difficulty in growing consistent volumes. So what's happening on our farms that is leading the volumes to be so erratic over the last decade, and how can we get these issues resolved and return to growth? To answer this, the industry recognised it needs a scientific foundation to create the conditions for growth. Back in late 2018, Greg Arthur from the NAFC up in Shetland and Elaine Jameson from the Highlands and Isles Enterprise and myself sat down to consider if there was a way to help unlock the full potential of the sector through a collaboration between industry and academia. We were able to secure some modest funding from the UHI, Aquaculture Industry Engagement Fund, to complete an industry survey which extensively explored the farm and production issues. The majority of farm and productions responded, and we then took the results and distilled these down into 3 main themes. These 3 themes then became the backbone of the Shellvolution project proposal, an industry-led 6.6 million 10-year initiative to allow the industry to reach its full potential. The 3 themes breakdown is shown in this slide. Theme 1 will investigate and develop a feasible industry-wide model for improving the security and reliability of SPAC recruitment. Every farm needs enough juveniles to grow or they don't have a business. And so SPAT is a critical industry input, and solving this difficult issue would lead to many improvements in on-farm efficiencies. Shellvolution theme 2 relates to the farm and the environment. Shellfish farmers want to ensure their production capacity is appropriate and their stock is being grown optimally and in the correct places. Farmers are mindful of minimising their ecological impact, leaving enough plankton for other filter feeders. Thus, theme 2 will look to test predictive growth models and assess current production capacities. Shellvolution theme 3 is all about developing industry best practice and will involve relevant academic disciplines with industry collaboration to measure, analyse, establish and disseminate best practice in an objective way. Achieving the best farming results in each area, this theme has looked into equivalents in the agricultural sector where agronomists provide expertise and advice on crop management and implementation. There's a raft of detail behind each of these themes, but I just wanted to give you a flavour in my brief 8-minute slot. So then we basically had the basic project outlined and we needed to figure out how to fund it. It was around this time that local authorities were looking for submissions that might be included in the Islands deal, which is the last of Scotland City deals. And these projects had to help transform the economic outlook of the islands. We felt this would fit the criteria and we submitted this project for R&D as a slightly unusual but valuable way in which we could help the industry strengthen its foundations and get back to growth. The project now has initial approval. Heads of terms have been signed between the local authorities and the government, and we've completed a comprehensive strategic outline case. And we now need to do the outline and full business cases, but we hope that this will go well and should see the project starting in 2022. I wanted to stress that we will be looking to involve a wide group of stakeholders and experts in this project, and we have adopted a customised governance structure here to keep the industry needs and requirements at the centre of the process. But we want to use the skills and expertise within our network, both across Scotland and beyond. We want this to be a project of wide collaboration, but at the same time, keeping a sharp focus on the industry needs to help provide these new jobs for Scotland. And the last slide. I hope that in 10 years, we will have a cutting-edge level of knowledge in the industry, that we will be able to see the integration of new scientific processes in our industry that will help us to be more resilient, more valuable, offer more good quality jobs and provide more ecological benefits than we do today. If this is the outcome, then I think this will be a great project for the sector, our local communities and wider society as well. And at that, Nick, I'll hand back to you.
Thank you very much, Michael. We lost the last few seconds. You froze there, but other than that, it was absolutely fine. Don't worry. It was literally just a few seconds. That's super. Thank you very much. That was great. Let's move on then. So now on Audrey McIver, please. It's all yours.
Good afternoon. Thank you for that. Just stay delighted to be part of the UHI Partnership 10th anniversary celebrations. As Director of Energy and Low Carbon at HAI, I have the pleasure of leading our efforts to secure sustainable economic development from the energy transition across our beautiful and brilliant region. I started my time in HAI just as the UHI project was established, and I've watched with interest as it has developed over the decades, and with many of the partner institutions playing an important role in the key areas of the economy, and I guess none more so than in the blue economy. Today, I'm going to cover marine renewables or offshore renewable energy more broadly, and with a focus on offshore wind, wave and tidal energy. So why are we committed to marine energy? If we look at the drivers of change for the region economy over the decades since the establishment of HIDB, we note that the local government reform, North Sea oil and gas exploration, upgrades to transport and telecom infrastructure have all underpinned population and economic growth. And we believe that marine or offshore renewables has the potential to be a notable driver of economic growth for the region. It is a strong fit with high purpose in stimulating sustainable economic growth, and the natural resources surrounding our extensive coastline provide us with distinct regional competitive advantage. All the ingredients exist for a successful marine energy sector, including the experienced supply chain, unique port and portside infrastructure, and indeed academic excellence. And with the hugely ambitious but entirely necessary net zero by 2045 target, offshore renewable energy will absolutely be critical to the success. So in terms of energy developments across the region, and I guess the real value that we see from offshore energy is that the benefits are spread right across our region. The slide here shows examples of energy developments from Shetland to Argyll and from the Outer Hebrides to Murray. Specific to offshore renewables, we have Nova Innovation in Shetland, we have EMEC in Orkney, we have CIMIC Atlantis with the Meidgin Array in Caithness, the Stornoway Deepwater Port Development in the Outer Hebrides, Kishorn Port and Dry Dock in Wester Ross, Nova Innovations proposals around Isla that Amanda had mentioned, and indeed offshore wind manufacturing, marshalling, construction in the Inner Murray Firth area as examples. If we look at offshore wind, first of all, then the industry has come a long way since the Beatrice demonstrators in the Inner Murray Firth, and that's the top left picture, built in 2007. With a 2 turbines and a total capacity of 10 megawatts. It was designed to examine the feasibility of building a commercial wind farm in deep water at a reasonable distance from shore. And indeed, it paved the way for the Beatrice Offshore Wind Project, which is now fully operational, including 84 turbines and providing power for up to 450,000 homes. And as Amanda had also referenced, the O&M base at Wick, which has been transformational for that local area there. And in Scotland, significantly more offshore wind is under construction or in planning. The latest leasing round that Amanda referred to, ScotWind, includes a further 15 potential sites and scope for up to 11 gigawatts of offshore wind power. The sector has made incredible progress in terms of cost reduction and achieved through innovation, learning by doing, and affordable finance. Recognised, however, it's not been plain sailing. Particularly in terms of the extent to which our economies and communities have benefited. There have been many challenges and reasons for this, and I will not go into those just now. But going forward, the Scottish Offshore Wind Energy Council, previously led by Minister Wheelhouse, involving industry, academia and public sector, alongside the offshore wind clusters, of which Deep Wind is one and supported by HIE and UHI is a member of, they're focused on closer engagement with the industry, the supply chain, and really focus on driving up that local content and getting better, securing greater investment in our region. The slide here illustrates the extent to which offshore wind developer engagement is underway through Deep Wind and working with colleagues across the enterprise agencies and SDI. The Deep Wind cluster now has over 560 members drawn from industry, public sector and academia. I think demonstrates real commitment to achieving a successful delivery of these really ambitious offshore wind projects, but also in ensuring that local economies, local communities benefit from doing so. And as the industry progresses, we anticipate an increase in floating wind. That basically, as projects enter deeper waters, the current fixed bottom solutions for foundations are not likely to be feasible. And we believe that this shift will be significant in terms of the local supply chain, opening up opportunities for new entrants and playing into many of our businesses' strengths in the region. UHI is already alert to this in terms of skills and R&D opportunities and engaging with Opportunity Cromarty Firth Consortia and plans for the powerhouse at Alness. We are also exploring how floating wind may support aquaculture sector, and as the North Sea oil and gas sector commits to a net zero basin by 2035, floating wind and offshore renewable integration more generally is being explored. And then lastly, on offshore wind, the EU and Scottish Government commitments, and indeed global commitments to hydrogen as a key response to addressing climate change, potentially offers a whole new route to market for offshore wind. And the production, storage, distribution and use of hydrogen will also create significant opportunities for the blue economy. So moving on to more specifically on marine energy, I guess it's fair to say that the progress there has not been at the same pace as offshore wind. But I think really worth hanging on to is the economic and opportunity that the marine sector offers. And relatively recent work by the University of Edinburgh and the Energy Systems Catapult with support from Wave Energy Scotland concluded that over £100 billion in net economic benefits over a 20-year period could be generated from wave and tidal energy. So I strongly believe that this is a prize that we continue to pursue. Since EMEC's opening of Billia Crew wave site in 2004 and the fall of Warren's tidal site in 2007, as I said, progress by the sector has not perhaps been as has been slower than that achieved by offshore wind, but there have been steady progress more recently. In terms of wave, albeit still at the technology development stage, following the establishment of Wave Energy Scotland in 2014 as a subsidiary of HY, we've now been involved in working with 200 organisations from 13 different countries, supporting 95 innovation projects and investing over £42 million. This has been leading to 2 scale devices shown here in the tweets that I've extracted. 2 scale devices, AWS Ocean Energy and Motion Energy, due to undertake real sea testing this summer at EMEC. In terms of tidal, again, progress has been perhaps a bit faster there. And what we've seen, first arrays of tidal stream devices installed by CIMIC Atlantis in the Pentland Firth and Nova Innovation in Shetland. We've seen more than 10 gigawatt hours of tidal energy being delivered to the GB grid. And we've also seen second generation devices. Orbital Marine device had generated over 3 gigawatts in a single year. The slide here shows recent tweets from Orbital Marine, Nova Innovation and CIMIC Atlantis, illustrating that next generation device development and the fabrication activity of that in Scotland. They're illustrating integrating tidal power with EV infrastructure by Nova, and also illustrating how already we are exporting the expertise on tidal. That's from CIMIC Atlantis, where their device being deployed in Japan. So all these developments are building Scottish capability and expertise in the supply chain. And really the challenge and the opportunity now is for how we support the commercialisation of the sector and in securing that Indigenous capability and growing the supply chain. There, promise. In terms of I guess, whilst I illustrated some of the potential around the economic potential for wave and tidal, I think it's always worth highlighting that the test and demonstration in itself generates economic value, and we've witnessed that here in the Highlands and Islands. The knowledge, the IP and the early stage engagement with the supply chain also provides a real solid foundation to grow the sector. Recent work, and I'll basically should caveat this, that this is not published yet, but I thought I would just include it, is just to show the WES activities have shown a net value add of 53.5 million to the UK economy and 241 jobs. Whilst the cumulative impact of EMEC between 2003 and 2017 is estimated at 285 million and over 420 jobs. Really just wanted to highlight that there is indeed economic value from the test and demonstration stage in these important sectors. So in concluding, I think it's fair to say that offshore wind, wave and tidal energy have progressed over the last decade, albeit at differing rates. The learning is constant, whether that be in technology design, deployment at sea or supply chain development. And I think it's clear to see that the scale of opportunity continues to grow. And the Highlands and Islands arguably have the potential to become the UK's epicentre of offshore renewable energy. We do have a lot to do though. We need to continue to seek supportive market and regulatory environment, particularly in terms of the commercialisation of wave and tidal. We need to address the barriers to greater supply chain content and greater benefits to our economies, but there is a huge amount of work underway in that space. We need to look at alternative routes to market and to collaborate more to deliver the research and development, the innovation and the commercialisation required to ensure that these sectors really are the drivers of positive change for the Highlands and Islands. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Audrey. That was super. Thank you very much. I'm sure there'll be some questions about that. And we'll now move on to Rachel Shuck-Smith about marine spatial planning. It's all yours, Rachel.
Thank you, Nick. I'm Rachel Shuck-Smith. I'm responsible for delivering marine spatial planning in Shetland, and that includes the development of both a local marine plan here, as well as participating in research efforts more globally. And I'm going to be specifically talking about the role regional marine planning can have in engaging communities in marine management. So some of you may be aware, in Scotland we have a national marine plan, and marine planning seeks to protect the marine environment with the aim of providing sustainable economic development and also opportunities for our Scottish communities to enjoy the marine assets that we have for both recreation as well as employment. Now, across Scotland, the Scottish Government decided that it would be important to have a series of more localised regional marine plans, and there are 11 proposed for Scotland, although only Shetland and Clyde were initially chosen to progress this new form of marine planning, and Orkney has just started the process. So the purpose of regional marine planning, obviously in Scotland, the blue economy is highly important to us, but all of our different regions in Scotland have different aspects of the marine environment and marine economies. So regional marine planning looks to protect elements of the marine environment and look at opportunities for sustainable economic growth and community empowerment. So we've tried to include communities both within the inception of the marine plan in Shetland, but also during the plan's development, and as we move to the next stage, the plan's implementation. And it provides, regional marine planning provides us opportunities for communities to shape the future direction of their marine space in a sustainable way. And this includes things like identifying localised problems, which will be different within each region in Scotland and wouldn't be as easy or appropriate to address nationally, and finds localised solutions which might be specific to that marine area. Marine planning is both a policy framework, but it also requires data. And that's one of the things that organisations like the UHI can contribute to on a national level. But also, as Ben alluded to, we have this ability to provide much more in-depth data at a more localised scale across the Highlands, because we have these campuses, such a broad array of campuses. Now, in terms of governance in marine planning, there's the opportunity for community group membership within a marine planning partnership or within an advisory group. In Shetland, the legal responsibility of marine planning sits within the NEFC and also Shetland's Island Council, and we have community representation. One of the important elements of this in Shetland has been the inclusion of fisheries, which are one of our key industries. And when we first started the process of marine planning, we realised that there was both an absence of policy steer, but also an absence of data to help protect this particularly important industry. And whilst fishing is important across Scotland, it is particularly important in Shetland. And by working on trust with, to establish trust with the local fishing sector, we were able to engage with them to map their important fishing grounds using both charts and asking them where they fished, but also the use of technology. And as you can see, that's allowed us to reveal patterns of use that shows where fishing activity intensity happens, but also where there's opportunity for other sectors to grow. And one of the things that we've been able to achieve by working closely with the sector is this trust. And that's meant that they've not only provided us with the data, which they were initially reluctant to do, but we can also discuss with them the scale of data they want to release in a document like this. However, we do have more detailed data that they'd also are happy or will provide to developers at a more localized scale. And by giving fishers the opportunity to work at both of these levels, it's meant that they're being more willing to provide data, which then in turn allows them to protect this important livelihood to rural communities. The other component that's important to them in management is understanding what the components of the marine environment in terms of its biology. And we've been working with communities to enable them to provide information and understanding of the marine environment where they live. So we've mapped community sightings of cetaceans, and we've also worked with fishermen to looking at historical records of important seabed habitats to enable them to assess whether I think this historical data is correct or not. And one of the things we found, of course, is the fishermen who are out there every day can tell us that many of these historical records weren't accurate for a range of reasons. Of course, data from the 1980s wasn't collected using the GPS that we have now. And a lot of these points are even plotted on land, and the fishermen were able to tell us more accurately where these habitats occurred, and the NEFC was then able to go and survey them. And this has allowed us to, the local fishing fleet, to gain MSC accreditation as they've worked with us to protect these important habitats. So marine planning provides the opportunity for communities to gain economic advantage. We've also worked with local communities to map areas that are important to them in terms of recreation. So we've mapped important areas for climbing and kayaking, sailing and rowing and scuba diving. And we've also worked with communities to develop a greater understanding of what it is about the qualities of the marine environment that they find particularly important to enjoy these activities. And that can now allow developers to plan their developments in a way that's sensitive to the local community. For instance, with the local finfish aquaculture sector, the local communities identified that they wanted all the feed barges to be blue and white to match in with the ferries. And it was quite a simple measure that the aquaculture sector could implement that made finfish aquaculture more acceptable to local communities. The next stage of marine planning will be the implementation phase. As I said, Shetland and the Clyde have been leading the process, and we hope to be marine plan to be adopted by Scottish Government next month. And during the implementation phase, we hope to work more closely with sectors like the mussel industry to look at more optimal uses of marine space through projects like the Shelvolution effort that Michael was talking about earlier. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you very much, Rachel. Fascinating stuff. Yeah, that's great. Okay, thank you. So we now have the last speaker, Ewan, from the Barrow Watersay Community Limited. So over to you, Ewan. Great. Okay, good.
Okay. Do the slides automatically come over?
You should be able to move them on the left-hand side now.
Okay, there we are. Right, thank you very much, Nick. And just like to say, the main focus of my presentation will be about the emerging seaweed sector from a community development perspective. But I'd also like to touch on the potential interface between seaweed and renewable energy in the setting of a remote fragile grid. So I'll move on. I struggled to come up with a title largely because we're venturing into this area as a community company very tentatively, and they're basically testing the water. We're not sure if it's hype, whether we need to do more research or not. The main photograph on the right is down in Coolus and Battersea, and we do touch on other areas in terms of the blue economy. There's the top left is the in Castlebay Marina, and middle left is the refurbishment of an old herring pier for the Battersea fishermen, and I put down on the bottom left, that's the community wind turbine, which somewhat ironically just below it is one of the best sites for collecting sorai for Alaria esculenta, one of the seaweed samples we're working with. As Ben alluded to, engaging with the community and getting them on board is very important for us. We've got 267 individual members, which is quite a high proportion of the adult population on the island. The part I'd like to emphasise here is also that we as a community company are not unique. There are community companies throughout the Highlands and Islands, and it's an interesting thing to bear in mind because we have a potential business model here. A while back, Caledonia Seaweed proposed a cluster model for the development of the seaweed sector, and this offers potential scale or the potential to scale up the industry to meet the feedstock requirements of a biorefinery. And the other thing I'd like to touch on before I'm considering the present is it's nothing new. Seaweed has a long history throughout the Highlands and Islands, with historically it was used for soda and potash for glass and bleaching industries and a source of iodine. Ironically, though, in the past it's tended to form or follow a boom-bust pattern, and it's a case of whether there are lessons to learn from what's happened in the past and avoid repeating those. In the photograph on the left are the loading bays of the kelp factory McNeely Barra, established, believe it or not, back in 1835. Ironically, one of the creditors withdrew their funds right at the start, and it only lasted for a year or so. Next slide is to try and bring us up to the present place and what's happening in the sector. There's been a spat of applications for pre-application consultations, followed by license applications, followed by the licenses being awarded. And if you look at in 2020, we had 11 applications coming through, and now a lot of these are actually moving forward to the licenses being submitted and actually granted. To the next slide. The other thing that I'd like to highlight in this, that biorefinery and upscaling are buzzwords in the sector at the moment, and there's a lot of ambiguity about what they actually mean and confusion when you talk to different people. As far as I can ascertain, there's two different types. You've got a cascading extracted biorefinery to valorize components such as polyphenols, fucoptins, etc. And you've got an alternative energy and or materials driven biorefinery. And being aware of the distinction between these is useful in terms of assessing potential feedstock requirements. And the next slide is looking at the actual feedstock requirements or projected feedstock requirements. You've got ocean rainforest in the Faroe Isles predicting sort of 18 to 73 kilotons per annum. GOA Ventures in the Netherlands, 500 kilotons. Whereas I'm putting that in context, BMI report for Ireland projecting 5 years' time that their total production is only going to be 0.9 kilotons. What are the figures for Scotland? I don't know. I can put it in the context of our proposed pilot farm of 1 hectare, which is 20 tonnes wet weight per annum, which would only be enough to provide the feedstock for 2 days for a biorefinery. The other thing that I want to touch on, I'll go back to the previous slide where I can look at the graph, and the other following slide shows it in more detail. The one thing that's going to result if you do upscale is you're going to get an offset in the prices. As you increase the volume of production, you're going to see the price drop per unit. And that could cause potential issues with the industry as it currently stands, because you've got wild harvesting supplying the food sector at the moment. If you start upscaling the industry, the prices are going to fall over time. And it's going to be interesting to see what the repercussions of these trends are on the sector as it currently stands. This is a similar presentation. It just shows the volume coming in on the bottom right as you're changing the situation. So on the left, you've got the current European situation. On the right-hand side, the future projected situation when you're getting large-scale multi-use farms becoming operational. There are a number of challenges in moving the forward from its sort of nascent emergent state into a more industrial format that can deliver. I'm just going to list these in terms of you've got nursery development, you've got the seeding method cultivation system, ecological impact, which are their pluses and minuses, and also considering their ecosystem services. There's capacity issues, what the future role is for wild harvesting, issues around the harvesting window, supply chain considerations, market structure, how growers, intermediate buyers and end users come together, and what Michael was talking about might be a future model for the sector. And you've got an opportunity for community development through the cluster model. We need new facilities and infrastructure. We've just recently heard that Sam's got funding for a seaweed nursery, so there is movement in that area. There's a need for a lot of research to be undertaken moving forward, and is being currently undertaken. And there are possible linkages with the local energy economy. And recently, the Scottish Government published its consultation into the heat and building strategies, which sets out a grand vision of transforming more than 1 million homes and an estimated 500,000 non-domestic buildings to using low and zero carbon emissions. The challenge we've got, though, is that in areas of remote and fragile grid, that's going to be difficult to deliver. And so you've got to try and consider how you're going to manage it. There might be a biofuel option, there might be hydrogen. So we touch on lots of different aspects that have been brought up in previous talks. And the other issue is that can we avoid the need to for expensive grid reinforcements by pushing local solutions? And this is one of the projects that we've recently received funding for, which is looking at issues in terms from a techno-economic appraisal of how we can, for instance, even service the plant requirements. We've got a proposed processing plant or pre-processing plant onshore that requires 3-phase supply, but we've only got a single-phase supply on the island. So this techno-economic appraisal encapsulates some of the wider national issues at a local level. And from recent talks I've been involved in as well, when you start talking about electrifying heat and transport, you're actually really talking about local solutions. So what we're finding from progressing this techno-economic study, that we're actually helping to address issues in terms of the local energy economy and how these might be solved. So you've got a natural interface between how we resolve problems in terms of pre-processing seaweed and also how we consider looking at decarbonisation of heat and transport. And this last slide is really trying to capture everything that I haven't had time to put in the rest of the talk, being aware we're restricted to 8 minutes. What I'm trying to do here, though, is to look at, create a mind map that looks at all the possible interfaces. Orange is looking at policy development and industrial innovation and how it can feed into the sector. You've got green biological science-based developments and also industry developments. You've got yellow market-related developments, pink ecosystem effects and climate net zero issues, and blue looking at the business model. And the take-home message here is really that there are multiple potential value chains for remote peripheral communities mediated by different barriers and drivers. And this is why it's a sort of reach out, a call out to industry and academia, which is summarised in the last slide. We're actively seeking academic and industry partners to explore the synergies and build resilient circular local economies to mitigate climate change. So my apologies for taking it at pace. and just trying to keep within the time limits. And back over to Nick. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Ewan. That's particularly interesting for us in SAMS, since we're creating, as you mentioned, our own seaweed farm there. So that's great. I'm very mindful of the time. We're due to finish in only 5 minutes' time. There have not been a huge number of questions come through. There's probably room for perhaps one, maybe two questions. A suggestion that we've had is that if you would like to ask questions offline, as it were, then by all means you can send an email to Jill. You'll have to tell me who perhaps would be best to receive the email.
Yeah, if you perhaps send it to events@uhi.ac.uk, I can fire them through to the right people.
Okay, so if folks got that, if you would like to ask any of the speakers particular questions, then please send your question to events@uhi.ac.uk, and Jill will very kindly forward them on. So that's great. I've got two questions there. In a sense, they're sort of similar-ish, really. And the question, first one is, what is the most promising aspect of the blue economy that is likely to give the strongest support to the net zero ambitions? I don't know who of the speakers would like to have a go at that. Silence.
I'm happy to come in if that's okay, Nick.
Yeah. Who's that? Audrey? Yeah, please.
Yeah.
Go.
Yeah. Well, I think in terms of the net zero ambitions, we're really conscious that the energy sector has a huge part to play in that, but it's not just about the energy sector. But in the context of the Highlands and Islands, in terms of the renewable resources for offshore wind, for wave and tide, I do think that and the spread of those developments, I do think there's real potential there. But I say that knowing that we have got real challenges in terms of securing the benefits right throughout the local economies, in terms of the supply chain opportunities, and in terms of the community engagement in those projects. But I think we just need to look to the likes of WIC and how the development there has really led to a real sort of boost to that local economy, and I just think we want to see more of that. And I think if I look to the wave and tidal sector, where yes, the scale and the progress has been smaller and slower, but actually what we've witnessed is greater levels of local content, local opportunities for the projects that have been progressed. And I think that sort of gives me sort of reasonable hope for, should that we get the right market mechanisms to support growth of that sector, that we can really ensure that we anchor a lot of the jobs and the wealth and the well-being for our communities from wave and tidal.
Okay, thank you for that. You've largely answered the other question, actually, which was where's in the blue economy, which is likely to give the biggest bang for the buck in terms of the economy. My own view on that is biotechnology, but if anybody else would like to have a stab at what they think the biggest economic driver is likely to be.
Nick,
You've got you go ahead. Yes, please, Amanda.
If I can maybe come in there, I mean, I think it's an interesting question in terms of what's going to be the largest sort of economically, and I think what we, because essentially everything could be subsumed by by offshore wind. To be honest, I think if it fulfills its potential, it will be absolutely massive. But I think Audrey's right to sort of draw out the fact that that actually, you know, wave and tidal in terms of local benefits. But I think, you know, if we're to think about different, you know, different geographies, different localities, will be drawing on and benefiting from different parts or different sectors within the blue economy. So, I mean, you just need to look at what you know, Rachel and Michael were presenting in terms of Shetland. You know, fisheries and aquaculture in you know, as far as the Shetland economy goes, you know, underpins, you know, so much of the Shetland economy. So I think, you know, we can lose a lot by just looking at the big picture, and you know, particularly from a Highlands and Islands perspective, we need to look at these localities and really look at where the opportunities are for these different localities. And again, you know, marine tourism is going to be, and boat-based tourism is going to be absolutely fundamental for some other communities, particularly smaller islands. So I think it's a really sort of mixed bag, and I think, you know, what we need to do is not necessarily focus on one, but think about, you know, it's about taking that place-based approach, which we're sort of seeing, you know, thinking developing on in a sort of a terrestrial way, but it applies just as equally, I think, to making the most of our marine assets.
Yes, thank you, Amanda. I agree with that approach. I mean, I know we, a large number of us got involved recently in a sort of a strength in places bid, and recognising sort of the granularity actually of what we've got in Scotland. So I think you're right. Just a simple one sector answer probably isn't going to do it. It's going to be very regional, and that's for the better, I think. Personally. Okay, I thank you all very much. I think we really need to draw it to a close. It is now 5:30. We have run on rather, but can I thank all of the participants? That's absolutely great. We've got Jill. Are you going to put another slide up showing us what the next?
I am just coming now.
Webinar. Okay, so. As I say, thank you very much for everybody who's contributed to this particular workshop. The continuation of the series you can see is there, and this is going to be on rural health, and that's on the 22nd of April at a similar time to that we've had today. And yeah, thank you, Lydia. I saw that. That's great. So I think I'll draw this to a close. Thank you all very much for attending. I hope you've it's given you some food for thought and that you've learned something, and I certainly have, and particularly interesting afternoon. So thank you all very much, and stay safe. Thank you. Bye-bye.